public information meeting on stormwater management. And there will be 2 additional meetings on September the 12th. One will be at 1 p.m. and the second will be at 7 p.m., both also in this room, so spread the word. We'd like to have a full room. I'd like to introduce our panel tonight. In the red shirt, we have Steve Norsini, who is Director of Public Works for the Township of Radnor. In the middle, we have Brian Merritt, who's with our consulting firm, AMAC, and to his right is Gene Haggerty, who's also with our consulting firm. I've lived in the township for over 20 years, and during this time, we've spent oodles of money on engineering studies about the issues we have with stormwater management. We haven't taken a lot of action to resolve those. This discussion that you're going to hear tonight actually started around 2007 when we did a preliminary study about funding mechanisms for managing our stormwater management. And so here we are in 2013 still having the same conversation. And the reason we're having those is that we have a backlog of capital projects. We have no dedicated funding source. Currently, the only funding that's used to address stormwater management is from the taxpayers. It doesn't come from all the people that help create the problems. And finally, it's a reactionary program, which means that we're really paying more to manage issues generally because we're working on things on an emergency basis. So with that kind of background, I believe Mr. Norsini is going to start. We're going to try to keep the formal presentation as tight as we can because the real reason we're here is to hear from you and hear what your thoughts are and answer your questions.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank Galen McCluskey and the League of Women Voters for providing this forum for the township to get this information out to everybody, and this is fantastic. And Mrs. McCluskey actually summed up quite a bit of what we're going to be talking tonight in just a few sentences, all important. So what are Radnor's stormwater needs? There is no one item that we're looking to fix. It's a multi-pronged problem, and it's a multi-pronged approach we have to take to the solution. So we have aging storm sewer systems. We have new development. We have redevelopment. We have infill development. We have impaired streams. We have tighter federal regulations that we must comply with. And of course, we have flooding issues. The resources are decreasing and the backlog is increasing. And these issues are township-wide. How can you tell? Here's a map that shows the township-wide stormwater needs. So you may see some areas where perhaps the dots are a little closer, but I think this really shows how the problem is township-wide. It is, these items are all over the map, literally. What are we accomplishing now? So I'll give you a viewpoint from the Engineering and Public Works Department. As Gayla said, we are reactive in a lot of things. We don't have the ability to go out and map and evaluate and plan like we should to have a planned program of replacement. So when we come upon a broken pipe, we fix it. But that's how we work it. We're not out seeking all these broken pipes. We do minor system repairs, we do emergency repairs. Sometimes they turn into capital projects. We have our MS4 reporting. Again, regulatory requirements, very important to our water quality and our stormwater needs. We street sweep, which is another stormwater item, and leaf collection. And that brings me to the ubiquitous pie chart that we have there that everybody likes to look at. Let's look at the biggest part, O&M, operation and maintenance, 56%. What does that encompass? A large portion of that piece of the pie chart is our leaf collection program. So the residents may see that as, I have a service of getting my leaves collected. From where we sit, it's a stormwater issue because we're keeping our inlets and roads clean and we're increasing our water quality. Program management, operations and maintenance, and capital improvements is at 18%, and most of them have been emergency repairs. Real quick, I think everybody's familiar with this, but what are storm sewer systems? In a nutshell, these are pipes, inlets to convey stormwater from our streets to different BMPs or structural items, and eventually there's a discharge to a creek. We have 57 miles of pipe, 1,500 inlets. Storm sewer is not a sanitary sewer. Sanitary sewer is the wastewater that comes from your house, and that water is treated at a treatment plant in Southwest Philadelphia. Our stormwater is not. They are two separate items. So planning is the key. Planning is ultimate in what we're trying to do here. And where we've gotten to this, at this point, in trying to come up with this stormwater fee and the ordinance, we've done a lot of planning. It's been great. It's really forced us to look hard at a lot of different issues. But moving forward, we need to evaluate what we have. We need to map what we have to determine what needs to be repaired, what needs to be replaced, and to prioritize those projects. And then with that comes a design and hopefully the work, the replacement or the repair. Real quickly, our township was developed early. Some of our pipe is over 70 years old. A lot of our pipe is galvanized corrugated metal pipe. There's a little note there. The National Corrugated Metal Pipe Association lists the lifespan for galvanized metal pipe at 50 years. A lot of ours was installed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Does that mean it's all going to collapse tomorrow? No. Does that mean we know it's ending near the end of its useful life? Yes, that is happening. Here's a perfect example. This is a picture of a galvanized corrugated metal pipe. This is in Rosemont. If you look at that, you can see by the picture that the bottom is rusted out. It's falling apart. The dirt is coming through the pipe. This pipe is about 45 years old to the best of we can tell. If you look further down the pipe, you see a piece of it's coming in from the top. So there's times when we encounter pipe like this where there actually is no bottom. There's just dirt. There's just a semicircle above it. Here's some terracotta storm sewer pipe, okay? The joints are offset. It's no longer a true pipe barrel. As you can see, dirt is infiltrating from the sides. There's actually a plant growing in it. And if you look far enough down the end, it's heavily clogged. So we address these items when we see them, and that's the reactive approach. It's not the proactive approach. This is in Rosemont. This is a road culvert. So what you see is a semicircle of galvanized corrugated metal pipe, which is bolted to a concrete footing. If you look closely, you can see that the entire bottom of that is rusted. Look a little closer, there's a tree growing through it. That tree did not start in there a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. That's been happening for a while. Now, this is something we know about, and this is something we want to repair, but there's other items like this out there that we don't know where it is. We need to find it. Part of the mapping and evaluation, our crews were out working on an inlet, and they were trying to find the outfall. Well, they found it, and this is why the inlet was no longer taking water. The pipe, 99, 100% full, needs to be cleaned. We're going to clean it. We'll get the inlet working. But we did do mapping as part of our MS4 requirement. We need to do more, and as part of that mapping, we needed to evaluate what we see. Here's an inlet. This is anywhere in Radnor Township. I don't mean that all our inlets are like this, but this is in any part of our township. Garrett Hill, Bryn Mawr, Rosemont, Wayne, you name it. You can find an inlet like this. We have a list that we try to repair. We go throughout the year repairing. You can see the mortar has come apart. There's bricks falling out. Obviously, it needs to be cleaned, which we'll do. So these are the things we're looking for. I go back to planning. When the appropriate planning is done, repairs or replacements due to emergencies are reduced. They're not eliminated, but they're reduced because we have the opportunity to go through and prioritize and plan and use the competitive bidding process to get us the best prices. Emergency repairs can cost as much as 20% more than planned repairs because they're done on the spot by an emergency contractor, and you're going to pay a premium for that. You heard the term MS4, very important term, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, hence the acronym MS4. It's federally driven water quality protection. It's administered by the DEP in Pennsylvania. There are regulatory requirements, controls inputs and discharges from the system, things that we need to do, the township. Again, this all ties back in with our planning. We're required to do inventory and inspections. We're required to do dry weather testing. We're required to monitor. We're required to map. So not only is it a good planning tool from a facilities and an asset management standpoint, we're required to do it. We have to do it. Protects our local bodies of water. Later on in Gene's slides, you're going to see how the system, how the plan has been broken down. And one of the items is MS4, or regulatory requirements. It's something that can't be overlooked. Effective stormwater management. It involves several things. Again, it has taken us decades to get to the point to where we are now. And it will take us time to improve on everything. But you have to look at things from an incremental standpoint. Okay, there's large projects, there's small projects, there's homeowner, there's resident projects. All these little dots on the map, when the time comes, make a difference. Some make a larger difference, but when you look at them together, it will help the system. And again, just like we had many problems, there's many parts to the solution. Engineering, that's my favorite because I'm a civil engineer. Science, it's part of what we need to do. Land use planning, regulations. We have a subdivision land development ordinance. We have zoning ordinances. We have a stormwater management ordinance. These are all tools that we here at the township use to make sure when a property comes in that they meet or exceed the stormwater requirements that the township has there. My job, part of my job, is to get them to exceed it and to perhaps use different methods for BMPs, cutting edge items. The regulations we get from the state, from the federal government, regulations that we impose on developers and residents to control stormwater. Again, the incremental approach. So you may own a house that has no stormwater management on it, but when you go in for that addition, we're going to have a requirement for a certain amount of stormwater management. So that's one of the dots on the map for the good. Okay, that's a gold dot. And when you look at all those dots where people have done that voluntarily or through our ordinance process, it makes a difference. Planting trees, all that stuff is great. Rain gardens, rain barrels, incremental items that make a difference. Educating the public. This public forum, again, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters. This is fantastic for us to get information out and to answer questions from you folks who we work for. So thank you, and I'll pass this on to Gene.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm Jean Haggerty from AMAC. Thank you, Steve, and the Gaylor. Gaylor and I had a chance to work together in 2007, and 6 years ago when we started this process. And so I'm glad that we're able to be back, making a little more progress, I think. And talk a little bit about the work that AMAC's been doing with the township and with the representatives from the community, and what the project goals were for the work that we've been doing. And you heard the issues that Steve discussed. Stormwater is complicated. There's lots of parts to it, engineering and planning and regulatory compliance and management and tools and technology. How do we get our arms around the problem? How do we figure out what it is we need to do next? How much money do we need to spend on this? So you hear a lot about we have stormwater issues. How do we now put a framework around that? What does it mean to us here in Radnor? So the idea was to look at what we're doing now, assess where we need to go, talk to people about that, both staff, engineers, community, and find out if we can come to some consensus about what the next things are we should do and how we fund those things. So you're going to hear a lot about the funding piece because we now have a pretty good idea of what our priorities might be, an order of magnitude of the funding that we'd like to spend, but how do we actually get that paid for? The idea is to then present these findings to your commissioners, which I see that several are here tonight. Thank you. And to give them some idea of what their options might be and hear from the public about whether those options are realistic and how the community would go about paying for these things. It's a really important piece of your infrastructure management program. So we set out to answer a set of questions. All right, let's bring it down to a level of detail. What are you getting done now? All right, you heard Steve talk about a relatively reactive management approach. If there's an emergency, you're getting out there and you're fixing it, but you're not ahead of the curve. Management by reaction tends to be more expensive than planned management because you're paying premium prices when you do emergency response. So what's not getting done? We're not getting ahead of the problem. We're not inspecting those pipes. We're waiting till we find out that something's wrong. So we're not getting out there and replacing it ahead of the curve. We're waiting for something to go wrong. When we take the priorities, how do we move forward? Is the fixing the system the most important piece? Is regulatory compliance and water quality more important? What do we do about our MS4 permit requirements and the regulatory piece? What's important? How do we make that work? How do we move this forward? And again, the level of service that's being provided. So you'll hear me talk a lot about level of service. We're talking about what does the community expect? How often do you clean the pipes? That's a level of service. How long does it take to take down your capital backlog? We have an estimate of some projects now that are in the $10 million range, a backlog of capital needs. Is that something you can address in a year or 5 years or 10 years? So we talk about level of service. We try to put metrics around how quickly we can accomplish things. And then we look at what does that look like every year, annual cost, and then how do we distribute those costs? So what's the solid program look like here? If you're not quite happy where we are right now, what will we do differently? Lots of conversation, again, with the advisory committee and township staff. We don't want to be overly aggressive, all right? We don't want to spend too much, but we need to make progress. We need to move this forward. So we talked a lot about a balanced program. And when I think about a balanced program, it really is looking at your operation and maintenance and putting money into the investment you've already made. If you look at that 57 miles of pipe and 1,500 inlets and I don't know how many outfalls you have. If you look at the infrastructure that the community's already invested in, it's hundreds of millions of dollars if you had to replace that now. So one of the most cost-effective things you can do to keep the system operating is to maintain that system, all right? So increase your service so you're getting ahead of the curve. You're actually taking care of that system. You know, if you bought a new house or a new car, you do maintenance. You change the oil, all right? You need to make sure we're doing the right level of maintenance. Major repairs, you saw some of those culverts. There's some danger out there that there'll be collapses. That's the thing that every stormwater manager worries about, that there'll be a pipe collapse. If that's under a road, you know, public safety issue. We worry about flooding, if you flood the roads where the fire and police have to get through. So we're really worried about maintaining the system to the best integrity we can to control floods and to control any kind of accidents. And we have to balance that work on maintaining the system and flood control and taking care of it with the regulatory compliance piece. So far here in Radnor, the regulatory piece is manageable. And I say that in a relative term. If you were in the Chesapeake Bay TMDL area, which is just not too far from here, you would have much stricter requirements for water quality, but everybody's moving that direction. The Environmental Protection Agency is getting stricter with the regulations. And so you do now have to be the community who owns the system, in this case, the Township of Radnor, is responsible for compliance, making sure that the best practices you have in the ground are functioning, that water quality is protected, and that you are overseeing all those best practices, make sure they're designed and operating correctly. So the program that we talked about was trying to balance those things. Get out there and worry about operation maintenance, worry about your capital improvement and rehab, and worry about regulatory compliance. So we did an exercise with the advisory committee, and this was about 24, 25 folks that represent a cross-section of people in town. And after they had that introduction that pretty much you just heard, we asked them where they thought if they had $10, all right, where would they spend their $10? What sounded like the priorities to them? And what we heard back was most people felt like getting some capital improvements done was important. 39% of the money spent, our stormwater dollars, was on capital improvements. But 29% was on operation maintenance. So that, again, we're showing that there is a need for both, and people understand that. Emergency money, not a lot of people want to spend that, but they know you need to spend that. So there needs to be some money set aside for those things. You can't control everything. Engineering, enforcement, the regulatory side, people don't really want to spend a lot of money on, but it's an important piece. We can't leave that out of the puzzle. And then program management tools. And here we're really talking about tools. You need good data to manage your system. You need, I would use GIS systems that look at aerial photography, asset management, spreadsheets, good work order systems, so you're more efficient. So we're talking about some tools that go along with that as well. So the plan that was recommended, came out of all these discussions, was that you need to have a balance of capital, O&M, engineering, and program management. And the capital probably maybe had the most discussion. There is a list of projects that's been compiled over the years that right now, I think it's about $10 million, plus or minus, and that it has things that we know are failing. It has some culverts that need some work, and it has some walls that are coming down, and it hasn't been QA/QC'd yet. It's what we know are the problems, but there haven't been a lot of work done on the solutions yet. But Radnor now has under contract another engineering firm that's helping them kind of work through some of these priorities and give them some better idea about what those projects might cost. So There's not a definite list of capital projects going to happen right now, okay? Nobody's agreed on what that looks like, but we use that $10 million as kind of a benchmark, that if we had $10 million, we know that's kind of the minimum we're going to need. As we do more inspection of the system, we're going to find more problems. So if we had $10 million, how would we spend that? And we looked at that and we said we could like to get the backlog down in about 10 years, okay? So that's $1 million a year investment that you're not making now just in the capital improvements. And then we looked at operation maintenance. We did the same kind of analysis. We looked at how soon could we get things done, and we looked, really detailed. How many linear feet of pipe could we replace? How many inlets would get cleaned? And we put a dollar value to that. We've improved the level of service that's being proposed now by about 50%. We'd make sure that we track and document our permit compliance. A lot of, I don't say a lot, several communities in Pennsylvania have been audited for their MS4 program and been fined. And the fines are usually related to documentation. You have to show you're doing what you said you would do in your permit. Do you have the documentation? Is it clear? And so it's not something that you want to deal with. Those fines are often $75,000, $80,000, $90,000 for a community. So you're doing the right thing. Make sure you're tracking, recording, and document that. And then expand your program management, good asset management. It just means you know what's out there, you know the condition it's in, and you're dealing with it in an organized manner. So what does that mean in terms of dollars? So the snapshot from your 2013 budget, you're plan to spend in 2013 about $1.1 million in stormwater. The program that we discussed would add about $2 million a year to what you're already spending. All right, so we grow the program to about $3.1 million. And you can see the kind of the analysis of where those dollars go, from about 1.3 in capital, an increase of 500,000 in O&M, minor but important piece on the enforcement and compliance piece. You really need to get that inventory done. And then program management, some tools to help you be more successful. Asset management, inspections, conditions assessment, those kind of things. So again, this is all based on a certain level of service. If that's the level of service you want to provide, this is the cost for that service. All right, now you've seen the numbers, all right? So how do we come up with $2 million? Stormwater is typically paid for in most communities based on your real estate tax, something that you don't see. I'm going to date myself a little bit. Back in the 1970s, when I started out in the engineering world, I didn't pay a water fee. It was included in my taxes. Right? Water, before authorities happened, people got nods, everybody remembers they did this, right? The cost of water and water distribution and water treatment became onerous, I would say, to keeping your tax rate. So people pulled it out and put it into a stormwater user fee authority. And now we've gotten kind of used to paying for our water by water use. It's a service that's provided, we pay for that service. Same idea around stormwater. It's a service that you get, it's a public service. This is paying for the public system only, maintaining that system, taking that system, all right, bringing it to your public and saying, how are we going to pay for this? What do you think is the right way? We can continue to pay it under taxes. You can raise taxes or move money around in your taxes, which is a challenge. But we're going to talk about that and what that would mean, and we're going to talk about a user fee cost and what that would mean, and compare the two for you and show you one way of going about and doing this. So the stormwater fee is a user fee. It's basically dedicated stormwater fee that can only be spent on the stormwater program. It's a service fee, so it can't be taken off the day you have a police emergency and spent somewhere else. This has to be spent on stormwater. A stormwater fee is usually based on something that can measure or estimate your impact on the system. So we often use something called impervious area. Impervious just means water doesn't go through it, doesn't infiltrate. And that we can look at people's different properties' impact on a fee by looking at impervious area. And I'll go through that a little bit more in detail. So the dedicated stormwater fee is an option. Real estate taxes, doing that now, you can continue to do that. Right now, whoever pays, you pay on the value of your property. So your contribution now is based on the value on your property, not on your contribution to stormwater, right? So we're thinking about now we want to try to change that metric. We want to utilize existing funds if you have them. I mean, this is the first place every community looks. Is there money or somewhere in a fund that you can transfer to stormwater? And if you can do that, you want to maximize that. Most communities end up with a combination of these things. You usually end up putting some money out of taxes, you have a fee in place that's dedicated, and you try to find money where you can. Now, the other alternative is to do nothing. And I think it scares everybody on the public works side doing nothing. There are some failing pipes out there. There are some flooding needs. There are public safety issues. You don't want to do nothing. So the pros and cons of a stormwater fee, I think this is my interpretation, but costs are distributed across all users. What that means is tax-exempt properties actually now pay into the fee. So under taxes, they're not paying. But if you're tax-exempt and you have developed land and a lot of impervious, you will now pay a share of the costs, including the township properties. If you choose, they can also pay in. With the stormwater fee, you can have credits. So if you're doing something on your property that's related to stormwater management, you can get a credit for that activity, right? You're promoting the public stormwater. You're avoiding a cost for the public. You can get some reward for that. They're really flexible. They can be a combination of taxes and other things. If you get a grant, you can offset some costs. A lot of people use their stormwater fees as their matching grant. If they're going after some money, so that if the state has a 50% match, you'll have some money to do that, and you can maximize and leverage your dollars. And it doesn't change how you fund and think about your budget. So the fee would still be voted on every year, just like a tax would be. You know how much the fee was going to be. And then once in place, it's a pretty stable way to go about things. You're not having to do a lot. You're only doing change management. How much impervious on your property is how much is impervious on your property, and that gets managed every year. Now, the cons of doing this, it's a change in public policy. And so when I talk about stormwater utilities, and I do a lot of this work, this is public policy 101. This is really thinking about a new way of doing business. And so it generates a lot of political interest and a lot of, I think, public finance issues. So I say that's a con, but just because it takes longer. But I think if you do it well and you go through the process and you listen to everybody, you'll come out with a good final product. It requires a new billing system. All right, so right now you're getting billed on taxes. So can we add this to your tax bill? Well, we're not thinking we're going to do that here in Radnor. Well, I shouldn't say that. We are using the tax system. You want to explain this to me? But it's going to be a standalone bill, yes? Right. So we'll use the system you have in place, but it will be a separate bill so you'll know what your stormwater fee is. So that takes some management. You have to understand how much impervious area you have in your property and send a bill. So that's a cost that you don't have under taxes. And I say there are winners and losers. What I mean by that is comparing it to real estate tax. So if you are a high-rise hotel, the value of your hotel might be through the roof. It might be worth millions. But your footprint, for how much impervious you have, might be relatively small compared to that value. Under the tax approach, you would pay a much higher rate if we raise taxes because you're on the value of your property versus how much impervious you have. But a very large parking lot might pay less because even though it's a larger impervious area, it might have less value because it's used for parking or other things. So people are going to come looking at this a little bit different. You're going to get folks from nonprofits that think you should just raise taxes because that's how they're used to doing things. They're tax exempt. They like that idea. And you're going to get some people that don't like the idea at all. But there are going to be winners and losers. It's dollars coming out of your pocket. It's the same pocket, right? It's just another way to go about doing it. So the stormwater user fee idea is not unique. You probably know this. I personally have worked on 25 or 30 stormwater utilities in the U.S. right now. I think the latest number is around 1,400. Western Kentucky University just did a study. But locally, Philadelphia's had their utility in place for years. Mount Lebanon and Meadville, Pennsylvania this past year. Rockville and Greenville, North Carolina, and you can go on and on. That you're not alone in where you are. Most people have not put a lot of energy and money and resources into stormwater management and are coming up with similar issues. As the regulations get tougher and their systems get older, they're all looking for ways to get some dedicated funding. So we're going to talk about distribution of costs. So when I talk about stormwater user fees, we're really talking about now that we have $2 million we need to spend, we know how much impervious area you have out in your properties because we have some tools. We have aerial photographs, we have parcel lines, we have all kinds of information. We can actually look at your parcel and know how much impervious you have. And so we can base your fee basically on an estimate of your impact on the system. And like water and wastewater fees, everyone pays. We talk about that, tax-exempt properties. And residents or buildings that have less impervious pay less. So from an equity issue, most people understand it. Not everybody likes it, but basically it's your contribution, your estimate is how we would set the fee. So we get a lot of discussion about impervious and what it is. And if you don't have developed property, if you've not developed your property, it's all grass. At this point, you would not get a user fee. you don't have developed property, you don't have impervious, then you would not get a fee. If you develop it and you put hard surfaces on there, new roofs, new driveways, and other things, then you change the hydraulics on that site, and you change how much runoff comes from the site, and therefore the community has to do more services. So it's kind of straightforward. Just an example of the data that you have available. This is just an example of what we look at when we're looking at impervious area. This is one parcel, has 31,000 square feet of impervious. What's in red, we actually capture the rooftops and we cut out the pieces that are not impervious. So you'll see some where trees and bushes and things like that have been cut out. So why do we use impervious cover? It's been proven in lots of studies, this is from the Center for Watershed Protection, that the more impervious you have, then the more runoff you have and the more water quality problems you have. And so it's a direct correlation between imperviousness and stormwater management issues. It's the best metric we've found so far. We don't know that, I mean, this can get better. There are better ways you can do this with more data and more time, but it's a pretty straightforward way to assess your issues and spread your costs. So what's it mean to you guys right now? We did a study of how much impervious is on a single family home here in Radnor. All right, median amount, so I think we did 200 properties, 100 below, 100 above, 3,460 square feet. All right, that's your median. When we started the project, we thought we would charge all single-family residentials one rate, called a flat rate. A lot of communities do this. It's an equivalent residential unit. You have such a diversity in properties, an amount of impervious from a very low number, 500 or 600 square feet, to 10,000 square feet, that when we brought this idea to the advisory committee, they basically said, that doesn't work for us. We have such diversity, we can't be charging everybody exactly the same thing. So we went back and looked at the data that we had and did all kinds of scattered things and correlations, and several of our advisory committee members said you need to be looking at tiering. And so actually I think Mike actually did half of this for us, was thinking about this long before we were, that the larger your lot size, in this case, we found a correlation, the larger your lot size, the more impervious you have. So to attempt to make this more equitable for single-family homes, we've decided to tier, or recommend tiering, single-family homes and how much you would pay under this fee. So the tiers would be based on, again, on lot size. So if you're from 0 to 7,000 square feet, you would be 1 building unit. You would be build 1. And as the size of your square footage increases of your home property, 7,000 to 20,000 and so on, the number of building units goes up to 4. So 1 to 4, all residents would be somewhere in those categories. If you're a non-residential property, we've measured the impervious on all those parcels. We've actually measured it. And we can then do a calculation. And the number we're using for a building unit is 1,500 square feet. So every 1,500 square feet, you would get 1 building unit. If you had 3,000 square feet, you would have 2 building units. So this is kind of a baseline that we're using in order to come up with how much we charge everybody if we need $2 million. Residential properties make about 46% of the total building units, non-residential about 54%. And we've added now into this about 25% of the total building units are from from tax-exempt properties. So the rate came out like this. So we looked at 2 options. One is if you bonded. And what we mean for that is we borrow money to pay for the capital portion of the program. All right, so we go sell bonds. You would pay for them over time, typically a 20-year process, and you pay interest on that. Bonds are relatively inexpensive right now, somewhere in the 4% mark, so it may be a good investment. Wanted to see what that looked like if we bonded. And then we looked at pay-as-you-go, which just means you wouldn't bond, you would just, every year you would pay what you could pay, and then the rates would be adjusted accordingly. So for each billing unit, so if you're one of those homeowners that has 2 billing units, your rate would be $73 if we with the bonding issue, or $113 if you go with the pay-as-you-go. So if we look at doing this by taxes instead, to pay for about $1 million of the program, you'd have to raise taxes about, I think the millage increase is 0.3172. So if you're an average homeowner in town, your property's valued in the $315,000 range. That's about $100 a year, okay, for $1 million. Our program's going to be about $2 million, so we're talking about $200 a year for the average homeowner if we raise taxes to do the same thing. Same program, same services, just comparing the two. I'm not going to talk much about credits yet. We've identified and talked briefly with our advisory committee that it's important to have a credit program. If you're doing something in your property that's proactive and helping with the program, then you should have a way to get credits. We haven't worked through the details of that yet, and I think that's going to be more conversation with your commissioners. But what we're thinking right now is that single-family properties potentially could apply for grants. So if you wanted to put a rain garden in or something on your property that would be stormwater management, you could get a grant for that. Smaller properties, you're going to be somewhere between 1 and 4 billing units, a couple $100 a year potentially. And that larger properties could actually get credits. So you could actually do something, a new stormwater pond or something in your property, you can get a larger credit. Got to work through that a little bit more. The thought is that there'll be a separate focus group to kind of work through the details of what that would look like. So summarizing the advisory committee recommendations, they basically told us, don't wait, let's get started. Let's start something, let's move. Keep the rate flat if you can for the first couple of years so people can really think about it and plan. The existing list of capitals, this is for, I'll say this again because I want to make sure I say this, but planning purposes only, that's not the exact list you're going to see, but that gives us an idea of the kind of money we need to spend. Get some solid operational work under us before we try to change anything, so that's the flat fee idea. Establish that credit program as soon as we can. And put in place a standing committee. I know you guys have lots of committees, but somebody that's paying attention to what the rate is every year and how that's being spent. I think people feel comfortable if you would have something like that in place. So where are we now? There's a draft ordinance in front of your commissioners. I think it's up on the website. And it establishes and summarizes pretty much everything we just told you. It basically includes details on the rate structure, and it has that rate that's all pay-as-you-go. The $56 rate is the one that's currently in the ordinance. It talks about enforcement and things like that, all the legal pieces that go with that, and it talks about a credit policy coming down the road. So I've tried to give you kind of a pretty quick and dirty version of what we've been spending the last year doing, and I hope that was sufficient, but I think what we really want to do is now generate some conversation, so I think Gayla is going to play our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. As you can tell from the focus of the meeting tonight, is really to discuss stormwater funding and some of the options for that. I don't know, I know there's been a lot of people who have come out to previous meetings to tell us that we need to do something about stormwater, and I think everybody in this room recognizes that we do. So if we can, focus our discussion instead on questions and comments on these proposals.
Well, thank you.
Excuse me, sir, I apologize. And if you'll introduce yourself and tell us where you live.
Okay, I'm Bob LaRouche, and I've lived at 228 Poplar Avenue for 45 years, and intimately familiar with impervious surface and pervious surface and what have you. And you talk very quickly, very wonderfully, I think slowly. Impervious surface, I know what that is. Will the township residents be able to understand how you calculate impervious surface? Because my property goes out to the center of the street, which is impervious, and it's got sidewalks which are impervious and all that sort of thing. So will we be comfortable when all of this is over that our property has been measured properly as far as pervious, impervious, and all the rest?
Yeah. I'm going to let Brian, we spend a lot of time on that, but let me let Brian, who's really the engineering guy.
So if you're a residential homeowner, as Jean discussed earlier, there's a tiered system, and that was based on an analysis of impervious surfaces within the residential parcels. So what we did within that sample set is measure all the impervious surfaces within the sample set. And based upon that analysis, that's how we built up the tier system and the billing units associated with the residential parcels. So to answer your question, the impervious surfaces on each and every residential parcel within the community, and there's about, I think, 7,000 of them, were not measured specifically. We did that because that's a lot of cost. There's a huge amount of time and effort associated with that, doing that. And the imagery and the data that we have to work with is good, it is usable, but is not perfect. It could be better, and you could make it fairer. And we heard that from your stakeholder committee, was they would like to see over time that the township move to a impervious area-based fee, so measured on each and every property in the future. The cost to do that is included in the stormwater program plan. So if adopted, that is something that would happen in the future. And from what I've seen in the discussions that have happened at the Board of Commissioners meetings, that is something that your leadership is interested in doing. Now, if you are a non-residential property owner, we did digitize all the surfaces within the parcel associated with your property, and you would be billed on per 1,500 square feet of impervious surface.
Could I ask you, how do you define impervious surface? How do you define impervious surface?
As simply as I can, it won't allow rainwater, precipitation to penetrate it. So it won't enter into the soil. It won't be uptaken into the vegetation. So it's sidewalks, roofs, asphalt. That's essentially it. Man-made surfaces, yeah.
Yeah, the reason I ask the question, I have gone down to Lower Merion Township many times for building permits, and they say anything that's not grass is impervious, whether it's gravel, pathways, or whatever.
Right. So it's very closely aligned with the township's definition of impervious surfaces. So compacted gravel, we are considering impervious. Yeah.
Excuse me, folks, we're being televised, and for the benefit of the folks at home, I hate to interrupt you again. Here she's coming with the microphone.
I think Mike Wolf from Radnor Township. I think the question might be when we finally get the money to do the infrared digital imagery, will his sidewalk and half of the street be counted in the detailed accounting for impervious?
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes.
Is that a fair assessment of the question, sir? Okay. If it's located within your parcel boundary, so the county maintains parcels, and within that parcel boundary, if a portion of that street was in the parcel boundary, then it would be digitized, it would be included.
When we were doing this, there's a set of parameters. When we sat down with staff and AMAC, and for the properties that we were digitizing, it was determined how small do you want to go? How small can they effectively digitize and say that this piece of impervious is 22 square feet? So if we move to this next step, so right now, the billing is based on what is proposed is the size of your lot, right? So it's not the actual impervious for a single-family homeowner. So 0 to 7,000 square feet in those various tiers. If we move to that, we have the ability as the township to determine that. So we can say to AMEC or whatever company it is, we do not want to include the fact that your parcel line goes out to the center line of the road. We don't want to include that. We would like to include your sidewalk because that is physically on your property, but we don't have to do out where your title line goes. And that can be determined. We went through 1,000 questions on how small a piece we go, what's included, and it's a living, breathing creation, so it can change, it can be modified as we move forward. If this was passed, it can be determined that, you know what, we see we need to go in another direction, or we need to get better information here. So, my suggestion would be, when the time comes, if we digitized each single family residence, we would not include that street. We would include the sidewalk, the driveway, the compacted gravel path, the roof, the patio, things like that.
Lawrence Smith. I live at 119 Runmead Avenue. I think if I bought a house in Radnor Township today, I would buy one without a sidewalk. Okay? Because I have responsibility for maintaining it, and if it's uneven, I've got to repair it, and now you're going to tell me that because it's impermeable, that may be something I have to pay for. So on the cynical side, can I put up a toll now? Can I take the sidewalk out? I mean, because it really seems like it's a public good, and it's something the public should be paying for. And I'm in favor. I have no problem maintaining it and shoveling it and do all those other kinds of things. But as something that the public uses, it should be given kind of as a, I won't say a credit, but something to account for the fact that it's a common good.
Well, you were right in saying that you are responsible to own, operate, and maintain it. I do want to thank Brian for giving this one to me. But the reality of it is, when you come down to it, in the scheme of things, depending on the size of your parcel, the 4-foot wide sidewalk by the length of your frontage is probably going to be a small part of your impervious when you compare it to the footprint of your house, looking down, and your driveway. It's minor. It may be the equivalent to, a large shed on your property, again, based on how much frontage you have, how the width of your house. So in that respect, I think it's fair to incorporate in, and don't get me wrong, that was my example, and it's definitely solely not my decision. It's a thing that staff comes up with, and ultimately, we go to the board. But that is just no different than if, in many areas, if sidewalks go in, residents are charged by their frontage for that sidewalk, right? So there is a fee for that, just like we do with sewers, you can be charged. So it is for the community good, but it does fall back to you. But I truly think.
The other side of the street doesn't have some.
Right. I mean, and when the subdivision went in, if this was what was required, it was required. So, you can't remove it. And I'm not, the solicitor tells me I'm not allowed to practice law, but I don't think you're allowed to put a toll up on it.
Yes, Doug Blasey. I live at 215 Upland Way, and I've got a lot of things to say, but I'll say them only a couple at a time to not involve, cut off other people. But it does seem to me this is very hasty. So while you're all saying you've been studying it and thinking about it, I see a lot of holes and issues that are not well considered, and the lack of a credit program is a big one. But if you would maybe, Gene, for example, go back to that slide where was that scatter shot of the intensity of development. Now, it looks to me like the almost up to a half-acre size, it's a 45-degree angle, which would say that the impervious area is 1-to-1 with the lot size, or it's certainly at the smaller size. And in fact, as you go out in larger properties, the percentage of impervious shrinks. So to simply have these sets of units, it's not equivalent at all.
Yeah. I read it differently than you're reading it, but I don't.
Well, you
I don't
just have to look. If you took the
amount of
first
impervious goes up as the
first
size.
couple inches of that, that's virtually a 45-degree angle that goes through those first sets of properties. And that's common sense. Every smaller lot in town is probably between driveway and property and a small backyard and a deck and sidewalks, almost completely impervious. That's far different than large properties that I have dry wells on my property. My driveway slopes inward. I'm not sure I contribute anything to the street. Now, I think the streets in Radnor are probably half the problem, or darn close to it. I'd like to know that. And that's something that we should cover under general taxation. And I haven't seen any discussion of that.
I think you've asked a couple of questions. See if I can
Okay,
try
so I'll stop
to pull
there
them
for a
apart one at a
moment.
time. The scattered diagram is a representative of some statistical analysis that was done that does show as lot size goes up, impervious goes up. You'll notice that what we did in the lot size, we did stop at an acre. So that 40,000 square feet here, there's a lot of variance as we get larger. So we didn't try to grab each one of those. All right, it did change as we go, but there's still, the slope still clearly goes up. All right, so there is a correlation. We can do the statistics and show you that. But that's one of the things. But this is not about the amount of impervious on every single parcel, okay? This is about the public cost for managing stormwater, right? So all of you contribute something. How do we distribute that cost back? So not what's happening right where you live, right? You have a roof and a driveway, like most other folks. What's a fair way to do that? I mean, we're certainly open to suggestions around this, but we've done a lot of this work and trying to find something that gives you a metric that allows you to measure that and to then distribute that cost. So people will start thinking about impervious area differently. One of the things we're trying to get to is and maybe your sidewalk needs to come out, is have less impervious, right? So we want to make sure that we're motivating people to think about what happens when you put more impervious on a site. So when I think of, and I hope I'm answering your question, or at least addressing that question, think about this more as what is that $2 million cost for public service? Do you support that program of services? Does that feel right to you that you need those services? And does this then feel like a right way to go about it? Now, on your property, your question about credits, the next part I think is important. I think people like the idea of credits, but there's a pro and a con to that. The credits will be if you need $2 million and 100 properties are getting credits, you still need $2 million. So those people are getting some money back, and everybody else is paying a little bit more to make up the difference. So you got to be really careful about what you give credits for. Definitely should be something that's positive, that gives the positive benefit to the community. And so if you have dry wells and water quality and rain gardens, and that's a really positive thing, and that's important to the community, then yes, you should get credits for those things, and you should maintain those things, and then that's positive. But you shouldn't just get a credit for having a best practice on site that you had to do because that's how you were allowed to develop your property. I think Steve feels strongly about this. I'll speak for him a little bit. That if you're doing something above and beyond what's required, you should be getting a credit for that. You know, that we want to motivate people. So you put a little rain garden next to that sidewalk and that drains into that, that seems to me worth getting a grant or a credit for. So I think we're mixing a couple of different things. So I think the tiering is not perfect, but a way to go from everybody getting one bill to breaking it into 4 parts. And until we get better data where we can actually go out and measure all those single-family homes, this is just an approximation. It was kind of a middle ground solution, I'd say. And I think, at least with the advisory committee, this is kind of where people felt comfortable with something we could understand. And the point about trying to measure every single square foot, because the lots do go out in the street. I mean, we looked at all the data. We know lots about your data. That's not unusual on your properties, that your lot lines are off a little bit. The aerial photography doesn't fit perfectly over your parcel lines. And so we've been very careful about using this lot size information. The tax database tells us how big your lot size is. So that's how you're going to get billed if you're a resident right now. And we're trying to take a lot of time on the non-residential properties so that we're not taking something that's public right-of-way. The right-of-way itself, the roadways, are typically considered part of the drainage system. You deliberately take stormwater and put it in the roads so it gets to the inlets, to get to the rivers, right? So in most communities, and stormwater law over the last few years, you look at what everybody's done in the utilities, typically the roadway itself and curb and gutter are actually considered part of the system. Now the township is maintaining that, and you are using tax dollars to do that, and it's mostly under your highway funds. Did I get all that in? And ask me more. I don't know if I...
Well, I'll do one more, and then I'll be quiet and let others, because I've heard from a number of times that we want to catch the non-tax-paying folks into that system. You've said it. Gayla said it in the beginning. I've heard some of the commissioners say it. But yet when I read the ordinance, I really don't see where they are covered at all in the fee system. Yeah, I see single-family residential parcels, all developed non-single-family residential partner.
They're non-single-family residential. There's only 2 categories. You're either a single-family residential or a non, and that would include tax-exempt properties. So just, we didn't get into whether, the details of that. Those are the 2 categories.
Oh, I see. So you've lumped commercial. I see. It's right. Not apartments. You're saying if you're anything other than a single-family residential property, you're that.
Yeah.
And then you're going to do it. Those are covered under this 1,500 square feet
That's right. We've measured those.
Of impervious, regardless of how they drain as well.
Yes.
So if a college put in a parking lot and it's all going into dry wells or something now, you're going to charge them regardless?
At this point, yes, until there's a credit program developed, and the idea is to develop one.
And what's fair about that?
In order to develop the property, if the university wanted to build that parking lot now, under existing standards, they would absolutely have to put in a dry well.
Exactly right.
Right, so that's the standard to build to now. Current standards are in place, and basically if you have to go to standards, you're not saving the community anything, all right? Think about what we're doing again.
Well, we're trying to cover, see, I see there's a difference between going forward and the going forward stormwater management program, which is designed to not add more water into the system. You're trying to, it sounds like, maintain the existing system.
It's a big piece of it.
I'd like to jump in on that, because this was actually a very good topic of discussion at our SAC meeting, and I see one of the gentlemen I discussed it with, and the point was brought up, if I build a new house and to meet the township's requirements, I have to put a subsurface system in, I should be credited for that. And my answer, my personal thought was, that really doesn't work that way. You are required, whether this ordinance passes or not, yesterday, today, or tomorrow, you're required to meet our stormwater management ordinance, regardless. So that's something you do either way. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. Part of my presentation was focused on that one slide. I noted many things. It's operations, it's maintenance, it's capital, it's flood mitigation. So this program, as broke down on Gene's slide, was broken down into 5 big parts. So it's not just maintaining what's there, it's also creating new items to help with flood mitigation. It is to replace pipes. It is to inspect things. Years ago, I'm going to date myself, DEP had a program called CMOM, Capacity Management Operations and Maintenance, and it was for sanitary sewer. But that somewhat applies here, and it's a little bit like MS4. A component of the program was to go through your pipes every so many years, and that's what we need to do. And like I said, it's multi-pronged. It's not one issue. It's not we're going to stop flooding or we're going to replace pipes. It's a little bit of everything. So when a business or a property is developed and they're required to do stormwater management, they're required to do that regardless. The fee would go towards many different projects throughout the township.
Well, I'll come back. Let others.
Hi, Bill McEwen, King of Prussia Road. I have just one comment and one question. So first, I think the model that was developed here that demonstrates a very strong positive correlation between impervious footage and lot size, I think was a very intelligent way to come up with a fair assessment. And if you really want to defend the model and the metric, just share your R-squared value, right? And my question simply is for stormwater runoff mechanisms that exist in Radnor but along a state road, the jurisdiction then is Radnor or the state? And maybe a follow-up depending on how you answer.
Okay, well, there's 2 things. So if you as a Radnor Township resident built a house in Radnor Township on a state road, you, by Radnor Township, by our stormwater management ordinance, would be required to put some type of stormwater management in. You would own, operate, and maintain that. What goes on the state road as far as their inlets, their pipes, that is the state. Okay, there's no doubt about that. But what does this program give us possibly the ability to do? To go to try to partner with PennDOT. I'll be honest, PennDOT at this point in time, their funding has been severely decreased, and they're not doing a whole lot right now. But and I'm not saying that to be mean or whatever. It's just a harsh reality that they're facing and that we face, because we have so many state roads that go through the township. But this program might give us the ability to do some type of partnership with them or work on a grant with them. People would say, well, why would you want to do that on a state road? It's not our road. I know, but it's our residents, right? But it is their road, so there's got to be a sharing in there. And this program would give us the ability to do that. I'll be honest, my biggest target from a state road standpoint is Lancaster Avenue. Just drive westbound from Aberdeen towards the center of Wayne in a big rain, and that whole right lane has a huge amount of water. We've asked them to look at that to see what they can do with the pipes. I don't know if they know where their pipes are. I don't know if they can do anything. But that would be something that, to me, is for the greater good of the residents of Radnor Township. Yeah, with the state benefit, but really all the folks in this room and, emergency services would.
You have my vote. So very minor follow-up. Would your answer change if the stormwater system was fed by a Radnor body of water?
I'm sorry. I didn't quite get that.
Would your answer change in terms of whose jurisdiction held control over the stormwater system if it was fed by a Radnor body of water?
Well, as this gentleman said here, I mean, most of the roads in the township are township roads. And, aside from being used to carry motorists and pedestrians, it is the way our stormwater runs and it goes to our inlets. So to me, that's a natural issue. And some of the projects we've been looking at and the things we've been talking about are, replacing culverts, replacing pipes. There's also areas of the township with minimal or no stormwater. I'm not even talking about management. I'm just talking about a system to get the water off the street and to somewhere, to the creek, to the stream. So we have areas like that. I had a call from a gentleman the other day. He said, I live on this long cul-de-sac road. There's like 2 inlets on the road, and I live at the bottom. And when the water bypasses those inlets, it blasts him. Well, that road could be a candidate for us, our road, our township road, to install additional inlets just to capture more water and get it before it goes down through his property.
I'm Roy Perry. I want to thank all the people that did all the work. I don't think I understand all of it yet, but thank you. The little I've learned tonight suggests that, in my opinion, you should engineer some of the individual exceptions out of it, unless you want decades of administrative nightmares about, no, you measured my lot wrong. My neighbor's sidewalk doesn't count. My neighbor doesn't have a sidewalk. I'm thinking of the shade tree ordinance we have, in which the government imposes consequences if you remove shade trees. They don't reward you for planting them. Maybe if there is a determination by experts that we need $2 million a year and a fee structure is put in place to secure that amount of money, 7,000 residential credits or exceptions will damage the program and turn people against each other and make it administratively impossible. Maybe you could go to a fine structure instead of a reward structure for people that don't comply. But I'm just thinking, if you want to make 90% of the work of this dealing with individuals one at a time about their problems, then that's how you should go. Otherwise, it could be easier.
And that's something that, when talking with staff, that they were very sure they wanted to keep the balance there. Because the more complex a rate structure becomes, the more information and data that you need to maintain it. Same with the credits. The more complex and generous, potentially, that you make that system, the more administrative costs the program has to bear. And that means, either the funding has to go up to support that, or you're diverting funds that could be spent on actual projects and services. So it's an excellent point.
Hi, Martin Heldring. I have a number of questions. 305 Audubon Avenue, I think you want to know. But I know there's a lot of other people coming, so I'll ask 3 of them, and if you need me to clarify any one of them, please ask me. I'd like to understand a little bit more about the governance. You mentioned that the projects that are there as a placeholder are a placeholder and really haven't been vetted by anyone. And as I recall in the financials, there's also a timing issue between when money comes in. More money comes in the beginning before you can actually spend it. You mentioned a committee, but there's nothing in the ordinance about a committee. So this township has had not inconsequential governance issues in the financial area over the past decade. What is the governance structure around how these projects are going to be vetted and how this money is going to be segregated and held separate from anything else that the township may or may not want to be due? And why is that not clear in the resolution? Because I don't think the average person is comfortable with, well, it's okay. So that's number one. Number two, I understand entirely fee versus taxes. I think most people get that. But at the end of the year, the average citizen has money coming in and money going out. And a certain amount of that money goes to the township. And now more money is going to be going to the township. The newsletter never really gives any indication to the average person what percentage increase this will represent for them. And for many people on fixed incomes, I think it's for everyone a good metric, something that they should understand. I think the increase is pretty substantial for many people, and they should just know it. And third is maybe the easier one, because I have others, but in the interest of time, you gave 3 townships up there, I think, in Pennsylvania that are doing this. Right? I think Pennsylvania, after Illinois, has the most townships of any state in the country, right? So 3 doesn't strike me as too many, right? And you quickly get down to Maryland, and I think, what was the next one, North Carolina? So
not a lot. If it's, I don't know where we are, 1,000 or something? I don't know what the number is, but 3 out of whatever that is, even if it's out of 100, that's only 3%. What is everybody else doing? And why is there the rush to this? So as other people ask, I'll come back. Thanks.
All right. Let's see if I'll start at the beginning, I hope. All right. Dedicated fund, and I'll look at the language again in the ordinance, but we're talking about setting up an enterprise fund. All right, so that is a dedicated standalone fund. The money comes into that fund through your general ledger accounts and gets put into the fund. It can be spent for that. That should be in the law, and that should be clear that that's how the money is spent. It's not, you don't think it's clear in the ordinance. Okay, so that's a good comment. We'll make sure that, because that is how, if you're going to defend stormwater utility user fees, then you have to make sure you do that. That's just as a key requirement, okay, that we have to have separate costs. The suggestion for the committee that the advisory committee made has been made to the commissioners. They're still debating that issue, and I think one of the issues that come up is that you guys got tons of committees. So what's the best way to go about having the oversight of this? And I expect that that's really for your commissioners to debate a bit more, but that recommendation has been made to them. So I would say that's probably what we're going to hear about a little bit more at the public hearing that's coming up. But we'll stick on that, but it's not in there yet. The value increase, a percentage increase. I guess we could put an example in and pick somebody's property. I guess we didn't think, it's such a wide answer. There's not like, boy, your rate's going up 20%. Everybody's going to be different. Every home is going to have a different rate. So what we tried to show you is what the dollar value would be. We thought it would be more effective to know that you're going to have to spend $102 a year, not that it was 5% of something. So that's just how we presented the information. We tried to make it as clear as we could so you could judge the dollar value and the impact that would have. So you know the size of your lot, you know how many billing units you'll have. So if the rate is $56, you can figure out that cost. And so that's kind of our thought process, Martin, and we could do it a different way. What was the last question? I should have written it down. Oh, the other townships. Pennsylvania has not had a utility law per se in place. A lot of other communities were way ahead of the curve on stormwater utilities. So the very first one in Bellevue, Washington in 1992, I think, went to a stormwater utility approach. The first ones that did this and looked at water and wastewater authorities and said, well, we need to have a stormwater fund because in Bellevue, the salmon river, I think it's the Snake River, the salmon is their whole economy. If the salmon don't do well, the economy fails. So water quality improvement was critical, and they passed this idea of a utility. It got very popular in the Pacific Northwest, moved to Florida, moved up the coast in North Carolina. I lived and worked in North Carolina doing this for years because it was so popular. It's creeped its way up the Northeast. Pennsylvania only has a handful. Philadelphia's did pass theirs about 10 years ago. Other people did not jump on the bandwagon. Just recently, Mount Lebanon, Meadville, Lancaster has not passed theirs yet, but it's under consideration. There are a couple of others that are going through the process that you're going through now. I think there's only 3, maybe 4, but I think that's the number in Pennsylvania. Just this legislative session, they passed a new a law that makes more specific how you can have a utility, and it talks about authorities and all kinds of other things. So now it's going to happen more. I think it goes into effect next year. So that's it. That was the answer. There was 3 as far as I know.
I'll just add to that is that Radnor is a home rule municipality, and it's our understanding from speaking with your solicitor that a fee is a legal way in order to enact this. In Pennsylvania, Governor Corbett just recently signed legislation that allows basically every township, if they chose to create a stormwater authority. That's under the Municipal Authorities Act, but basically because you're a home rule municipality, it's my understanding, and I am not a lawyer, that you can do a user fee approach for stormwater.
My name is Jim Block. I live on Gulf Creek Road, which is very aptly named because it is along Gulf Creek, which floods regularly. I haven't heard anybody mention anything about creeks or flooding as a result of creeks. I'm wondering whether that is so vast that you're ignoring it, or whether that you're actually, it has come up in your meetings.
Come on a lot. We're not ignoring it.
No, thank you. By no means are we ignoring that. Gulf Creek, flows through North Wayne and ends up down in your neighborhood. We know we have serious issues in North Wayne, and we have done some designs for a stormwater detention basin, various iterations in that North Wayne area. Now, they haven't been enacted. They haven't been gone to final design. They haven't been constructed. But although we didn't mention Gulf Creek Road, which is near the bottom, we have talked about projects and issues and concerns further upstream on Gulf Creek. And things that we do up there will affect you downstream. So maybe nothing specific to your portion of Gulf Creek from King of Prussia to county line, but other items to be done to Gulf Creek upstream, as far up north as far upstream as Forest Road, Eagle Road, North Wayne, Poplar, all those areas, that all flows down to you. So if there were projects done in that area and there is severe flooding in those areas, then that would affect you in some manner. So we didn't forget about you.
Good evening. My name is John Sheehan. I live at 409 Windsor Avenue in Wayne. I've lived in Wayne for 42 years at the same location. And first of all, I live close to one of the hot danger spots, which is the area around the Wawa convenience store. It's actually at the bottom of the street that I live on. And during rains, I know water has actually entered the Wawa store. The cleaning store, dry cleaning store right next to Wawa, they have sandbags on their exterior doors to prevent water from coming in. They leave the sandbags there all the time. We've had residents who have lost cars. I've heard about police reports where mothers with children whose cars have stalled in that intersection have had to have been evacuated by emergency people. And I just remind everybody that just a little over 2 years ago, a 12, 13-year-old boy almost died within a short walk of this building, maybe a half a mile away. Logan Schweiter, he was playing in a culvert with two friends. He got caught and he was underwater for 10 minutes. Logan has serious brain damage, unable to walk, unable to speak, unable to eat, real serious problem. Right next to Wawa, I've seen children playing there right after a big rain event, 3, 4-year-old children. Some of the storm grate openings there's nothing to block the legs of a small person from going into the opening and getting trapped inside one of those storm grate entrances. There is no grate. That's really the problem. I'm in favor of some type of fee to jumpstart and catch up with the deferred maintenance of the stormwater system in Radnor Township. And I'm grateful to the League of Women Voters for hosting this session tonight, to our commissioners, especially my commissioner, Jim Higgins, who's been pressing the commissioners hard to get something done quickly. I have some concerns, though. Let me tell you about my concerns. Most of the emphasis of this program is, as I understand it, is infrastructure. Pipes, underground detention, more capacity to take more water more quickly away from the areas where it's a problem. The problem that I have with that is a couple of things. First of all, there's some other ways of achieving the same goal without hard infrastructure. One way that I'm familiar with, and most of what I learned about it is from living fairly close to a 2-acre tract of land that's close to where I live, where there's a lot of trees on it. And the trees on that land, they're at the end of their life. Many of them have been removed, clear cut. More of them are going to be cut down. And what I learned is how much stormwater they actually absorb, an incredible amount of stormwater. So what I'd like to see is a more balanced program. I'm not saying take anything away from the urgency of fixing the broken infrastructure and dealing with critical emergency areas, people getting water in their house every time we have a big event. But I'd like to see an equal amount of emphasis being placed on engaging the natural elements that'll do it'll help to achieve many of these goals for free, almost for free. And instead of putting polluted water into drainage systems that'll add to the polluted water in rivers and downstream from here, if we allow the ground to absorb the water, it'll clean the water, it'll detain the water, it'll store the water, and trees are a big ingredient to that. I could talk a lot about trees. I'm just going to mention one little thing I learned about trees.
Sir, do you have a question, or if you have some?
I'm actually making a statement. I don't have a question. I guess the question I have is, why can't we have more emphasis on green infrastructure being in the way of trees as opposed to hard infrastructure in the way of pipes and storage facilities, and a faster way to get polluted water further away from Radnor Township? And I just wanted to add one little statistic. Radnor Township has a shade tree ordinance. Here's the way it works. If I remove 100 trees on my property, I'm only required by the ordinance to replace less than 3% of the trees that I remove, less than 3%. In the city of Atlanta, the same requirement is about a 20% replacement factor, or about 6 times what it is in Radnor Township. My big concern is that we are deforesting Radnor Township, and that the rate of deforesting it might be partially offset by all these improvements we're talking about, but maybe it won't get a lot better.
I wouldn't want you to think that tree planting and infiltration is not part of the solution. You know, we talk about projects and things, they haven't been designed at all, most of these, right? So they're conceptual, or a 10,000-foot look down on these things. So they're high-level looks. Our MS4 requirements, best management practices all encompass the things that you have said. So please don't think because there wasn't a specific slide on that. And I think you've misread our shade tree ordinance, because if you had 100 trees on your property that fell under where the appropriate diameter, the first 5 you would be allowed to remove. The next 95 you would do compensatory plantings. And if one of those trees was 30 inches or greater, a heritage tree, you'd be planting 6 trees just for that one tree that you remove. We have a very aggressive shade tree ordinance, and we just had Shade Tree Commission last night. And the purpose of that is to keep Radnor the Tree City USA that it is, and for stormwater management and aesthetics and property values. But we have a very aggressive shade tree ordinance. And by all means, when we mention BMPs, trees, plantings is all part of that.
Very short.
A real quick response. I'm very familiar with the shade tree ordinance and the improvement to it. If a 30 diameter inch tree is removed, the Radnor, the new ordinance requires that it be replaced with 6 2-inch diameter trees.
2.5 to 3.
It's 2 to 2.5. But if you multiply 6 times 2 inches is 12 inches. The biomass of a 30-inch diameter tree is about 30 times greater than the biomass of 6 2-inch diameter trees.
Hi, good evening. My name is Maya Vamrasam. I live at 716 South Roberts Road. I'm also the Delaware Riverkeeper. My organization is the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. We have many residents in Radnor and throughout the watershed, and so I'm also speaking in that capacity. And I have lived in Radnor Township directly or indirectly through my mother since I was 18 months old, and I'm 47. So I've been here for a long time. Left for school, came back. Actually, the gentleman who just spoke, it was a great setup. I want you to know I have given extensive comment to the commissioners. I've testified verbally, and I've also given extensive written comment. I'm going to put copies of my comment and summaries of those comments in the back. For those who are interested, I am making a comment. I'm not asking a question, as I understand that was part of the objective of tonight, to hear feedback. And I have spoken to the commissioners, so this is a quick summary for those who might be interested in the audience. But in fact, the user fee is a fine idea. Getting it done quickly is a fine idea. Getting it done right is the most important thing. And the way the ordinance is crafted, the way the language of the ordinance is crafted, the gentleman in the back is correct. It's about controlling stormwater runoff. It's not about reducing the volume of runoff. It's about collecting the water and moving it around in pipes. And that is not the best way to reduce flooding, flood damages, erosion, water quality problems, and all of the harms that come from stormwater runoff to our communities. As the ordinance stands now, the language of the ordinance, structural or non-structural strategies that would reduce the volume of runoff cannot be funded by the user fees that are collected. Conceptually, you talk about it. The whole year building up to this, you talk about it. But when you read the language of the ordinance, it's about pipes and detention. And you can look quizzically, but I did read the language at the commissioner meeting. I'm not going to bore people with it here. It's in my comment. But that means that strategies for avoiding runoff, like removing impervious surfaces and replacing it with trees and shrubs and native plants to restore the absorbency of the soil, that does not get subject to the user fee. Carrying out projects to address the erosion of public and private lands that result from increased flow volumes and velocities, they cannot be the subject of the user fee. Restoring natural channels in order to direct stream flows away from homes but on a natural channel design using appropriate environmentally sensitive practices, they cannot be the subject of the user fee, nor can floodplain restoration projects in order to increase the absorbency of floodplains. And that's just a few examples. My second point is when it comes to the credit program, the way that you talked about as though the credit program applies to anything good having to do with stormwater, but in fact, that is not the case. The language of the ordinance provides credits for treatment. Treatment in the water world is about water quality. So again, if you're talking about practices, if somebody is putting a practice on their property that will reduce the volume of runoff, they can't get credit for it, and that's a problem. That needs to be addressed. The ordinance really does need to set specific criteria to give guidance for the projects that will be the subject of the user fee, the credit program, and to measure the success of projects that are implemented by the program. That language should either be directly put into the ordinance, or perhaps you could put in the ordinance the creation of this advisory committee to make recommendations for crafting criteria to guide the decision making and measure success so that we know where we've done a good job with our investment, and to guide future decisions. So I think that needs to be added to the ordinance. And really, the way the user fee is proposed, it does not provide equity between single-family residences and non-single-family residences. If you're a single-family residence, the larger your property, the more your runoff, particularly under traditional land management practices by homeowners, you have to pay more to compensate for the increased volume of runoff from your larger property. That's not the case with the non-single family residence parcels. On the non-single family residence parcels, they're only measuring the impervious surface, and the definition of impervious surface explicitly excludes lawnscapes. Now, there's scientific evidence, it's in my comment, that documents that lawnscapes are about as hard as pavement, which means they create almost as much runoff as pavement. So if you've got a golf course with a huge amount of lawnscape and a whole lot of runoff, and I have a picture in my comment from one of the golf courses in Radnor that visually shows you this, you actually have a relatively small fee comparatively because they don't tend to have many buildings or parking areas compared to the amount of lawnscape. And that's the same with a lot of the non-single family residence kind of properties that are in the definition of the ordinance. So we really do need to, with the non-single family residence properties, we do need to have the fee structure include the size of the property, because most of those property outside the buildings and the parking lots are managed as lawnscape, and that is a very significant source of stormwater runoff that is not being captured, and that's basically, being well, that denies the equity argument that I've heard put forth so often when it comes to the ordinance. And then the only other point I really want to bring out quickly is that I do think it's vitally important that this ordinance does recognize that there are some people in the township who are on fixed incomes, for who this kind of fee may be a significant burden, a significant hardship. And I think that folks should be given the opportunity to come forth and, under defined criteria, demonstrate that if this fee is a true hardship for them financially, that there should be some way to provide forgiveness. So that's just some of the highlights of my comment. Again, for anybody who might be interested, there's a summary, and the comments themselves are in the back of the room.
Number 5. Do you want to go next, or may I call on somebody else?
Hello, I'm Jim Gutline from Banbury Way here in Wayne. Do you have a list of the proposed projects, the 10 projects that you use as your assumptions for the baseline of $10 million that you could provide?
You don't have it with us currently, but we could see that you get a copy of that.
Okay.
It's my understanding, and Elaine, you can correct me, that there's going to be a link on our website to a stormwater page at some point in time. So we'll make sure as much information gets up there as possible. Do you want to come?
She says she has the list. I guess to a follow-up of that, has other measures within the budget been looked at outside of a fee to cut other areas to keep everything no fee and keep it within existing taxes?
So I guess you're saying, were there other ways to reduce expenses to then use that money for stormwater management? I'm not sure I quite understood it. Is that?
Take money in the existing budget and allocate it differently towards a project of this nature.
Okay.
So minus something else to fund this.
Okay, this is a huge.
There's the list. We'll put it on the website.
Yeah, we'll definitely link that. I'm sorry, Mr. Guthline, could you be more specific? I guess I'm just not understanding the question. So you're saying
budget cuts in one other department within the township to fund this department.
As part of the study, we did not look at that. That is really up to the township leadership in terms of making that decision. So we didn't look at it, nor did we discuss it with the stakeholders. It was really, the simplest discussion we can have is about doing it on the tax base or doing it as a fee. So if the township were going to look at kind of a combination of the two, that's really up to the leadership to discuss and figure out how to get it done.
So the last comment I have to make is I think all this work is great. I think a lot of thought went into it, but there are a lot of assumptions that need to happen and be true for all this to pan out. I have a fear that it'll be underfunded from the get-go due to the assumptions taken. If it's a 10,000 look view at the problem right now, the details aren't fully assessed.
And when you're doing things on this level, on that 10,000 foot view, on a high level, we are making estimates on cost and time. it will actually cost money to get some type of design to get a true cost that we can come up with, or a good estimate of probable construction costs. And just because there may not be a project up on this list that somebody doesn't see, the way we saw this list was as a fluid document. So something that might not be noted when this was done 6 months ago would be noted tomorrow, or it's worded differently, or it can change. But we do have very good estimates for some of the projects that we've done preliminary design on. On others, we do not. And part of this program is to step into that and say we need to do preliminary design, come up with good budget numbers, and go through the budget procedure, which currently is to go to the Board of Commissioners and vet these projects out. And that's how that would work.
My name is Gail Guthine. I live at 105 Banbury Way. Once you've tackled these projects and you start moving on to others, what is your criteria for assessing the priority? Is it based on budget? Is it based on property damage, the density of population in the area? What are you going to use?
It's really all of the above, okay? The projects were broken down, the money, the stormwater money from the SAC committee, when everybody placed their stormwater money, gave us our groups. But that is how we have to do it. We look at how severe it is and how many people are affected by it and what's the potential effect by it. Is it a homeowner? Is it motorists? Is it emergency services? Is it in front of the firehouse in South Wayne? So those are all things that we look at. And then staff can come to the board with recommendations of those projects. But the board does not have to accept those recommendations and may say, but what about this? So it's not any single person's choice, and those criteria are looked at based on that and on cost. Do we do one project 1 year that affects a few people, or do you do 3 projects in 1 year that have maybe helps out 12 people or 15 residents or 50 residents? So there's a lot of work to be done at this point. We have a list of projects. By no means is that a priority necessarily. I mean, we say we prioritize them, but again, it's a fluid document and it can move. And we all know we have decades-old problems of flooding, South Wayne, North Wayne, Banbury, Francis, coming off of 30. So we have them. We also have other places, Midland. And there's a lot of tough decisions that will have to be made to get this work done within the parameters of the program.
Thank you. My name's Fred Stein. I work with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and I just wanted to reinforce the concept of investing in infiltration and reducing the amount of money that's going towards the piping, because that's all just pushing the problem downstream, like the Gulf Creek resident behind us who you had mentioned that if you focused some of these dollars on the fix above him, that would impact him. And it probably, if you did infiltration and reduced the volume of the stormwater upstream, then that would definitely impact him by reducing his flooding. If you clear out inlets and increase fix the piping, that's going to impact him in a much more negative way. And the same is true throughout the municipality and then downstream, to your downstream communities. Just like your upstream communities are probably having a negative effect on you, you want to take this opportunity to not only safeguard the residents, and every dollar you spend on infiltration and rain gardens and things like that, that's investing and that's reducing your O&M costs in the future. You said 56% of this was going towards O&M. Well, if you put in pipes, wasn't it 56 or 50?
56% of the current budget. And I guess I'd just like to jump in on one thing. I don't know how it got wrapped around that all we were doing is really concerned about conveyance, because that's not the case. we talk about stormwater management, and it's the whole list. And so what we're talking about on these projects is not necessarily just in the inlet, through the pipe, and down. Whether it may be a conventional basin with 4 bays, and I know Mrs. Van Rossum is pointing at the ordinance, and I'll give you an example, even on the ordinance. To collect, convey, detain, pump, and transport flood protection. Well, flood protection could be a floodplain project. It could be a basin. We could install a basin that has 4 bays, that has infiltration, and maybe or maybe not that wording needs to be addressed. But I don't think you should point everything to that. What we're talking about, maybe it's not clearly stated here, is to transport and get rid of. I mean, stormwater management infiltration is part of our stormwater management ordinance and would be part of these projects. And there's no reason why, we've talked amongst ourselves and with our engineer, maybe there's a street that we replace pipes on because they're degraded. That one picture where the pipe was all rusted out. Maybe as part of that project, there's an infiltration bed in between 2 inlets or 4 inlets or 6 inlets. So I don't want you to think that everything is cookie cutter 1970s engineering where there's a big old basin and there's pipes and we're just going to get it down. That's hardly the case. In some instances, maybe you do look at old school, but we would like to be very forward thinking and use all the new methods that are out there.
Well, and I think that it's very important for that wording to be in the ordinance, and the people who have read it and given comment on it don't read that. More than one person has said that, and it's not in there. And you're leaving it all up to future people to interpret it, and you may see it that way, but it needs to be clearly stated that that's where the balance that we're all talking about should come in.
Lawrence Smith, Runnymede Avenue. One of the things that, if you look at environmental issues in the world today, a lot of them have the externalities, and the question becomes, how can you make that externality a value, and then that people decide that they're going to capture it? And I think looking at the ordinance and saying, how can we make this issue of credits something that people place value on it, and they decide, I don't want the water leaving my property. I want to capture the water so that I can use it for wash my car, or water my lawn, or take care of my garden. And so I think having some vision of credits and how those things are really going to help, because the capacity of the system can't handle the volume now. And by cleaning the pipes, it's not really going to solve a problem of volume. You have to try to figure out, you have to have components that address that volume at the source.
Hi, Sloan Walker. I'm a Radnor resident. Participated in the Stormwater Advisory Committee. I think this is a very reasonable proposal, and I think one of the things that's great about it is it really asks everybody who's benefiting from our stormwater system to participate and help make sure it's up to where we need it to be. I'd also like to point out that in many ways our stormwater problems are getting worse while the system hasn't really been improved. And I'd cite a recent study by Penn Environment, which studied the incidence of extreme rainstorms from 1948 to 2011. And in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania has experienced a 52% increase in those extreme rainstorms. It looks like you guys have seen that. I think it's kind of common sense. We all feel this and see this. These storms are more frequent. And they're also getting bigger. The storms are getting bigger. According to the Penn Environment study, the amount of precipitation released by the largest annual storms in Pennsylvania increased by over 20%, 23% over that same period of time. So I think what we're seeing is while the system has been somewhat static, the problems have been getting worse, and I think we need to try to start to catch up with the situation. So I think it's a good effort and something we need to do before the problems get worse. Could I ask one question? Am I right in thinking that the ordinance, the real impact of the ordinance, is not to set anything on automatic pilot, doesn't force the board to set any particular number or projects that have to be fixed, but it really is about a question of how broadly the funding is developed. It's sort of broadening the funding base. Is that a fair statement?
Thank you, Sloan. We are trying to write language that does incorporate all the things that you're saying. I mean, this is not an easy solution. You know, the infrastructure needs to function as designed. But as we move forward, green infrastructure is the future. I mean, I don't think anybody doubts that the whole stormwater world has changed, where our vision 20 years ago was to get it off your property, and your vision now is to keep it on your property. So if that's not clear in the ordinance, we need to work on the language that this is about comprehensive stormwater management, and you should find the right solutions for the right problems, right? So sometimes that will be fixing that culvert so the road doesn't collapse, and other times it'll be putting tree boxes in along Lancaster Avenue to help with the rainfall. So we'll make sure that we address that. But I think that is the issue, is not to tie your hands, but to give the community the tools they need to make the right decisions. And we're at the very beginning of this. This is going to evolve over time. Communities that have utilities in place for 10 or 15 or 20 years, they look very different than they did when they started. You may be a leader in Pennsylvania, there may not be a lot left, but if you guys do it well, other people will be following behind you. Your neighbors will likely do this. You can get some folks upstream working on the same issues and put some money behind this, then you're going to see a very different future in stormwater. I think I was at the American Public Works Association meeting in Chicago yesterday. This was the main topic of conversation. How do big cities in particular, the city of Baltimore, how do you start to change the dynamics so you're doing more green infrastructure? It's not inexpensive initially to do a lot of capital work on green infrastructure, and there is a long-term maintenance need. It doesn't, you just put in a new rain garden, it doesn't go away. The community is still going to have to make sure those things function, they get clean, the media gets replaced. So I think you have some really smart folks here at the township that understand that whole thing. We are just trying to work through all the details of how we present that. So we appreciate your thoughts on how we can improve the language. I think that's only good for us.
I'd just like to add one thing. So the user fee is intended to pay for a program plan of services. Probably, as Steve put it, the most fluid aspect of that is what happens within the capital improvements project section. But the other pieces, which we touched upon, the operation and maintenance, it's really to create a proactive, planned approach to addressing the existing system. And then that capital component, where you get the best bang for your buck, the most decrease in runoff, limiting what's getting into the system, reintroducing it back into the natural hydrologic cycle is very important. But we needed an estimate to start with, because I think at one of the first stakeholder meetings we were asked, what are we in for? And that's hard to get your arms around, so you have to start somewhere.
Martin Heldring. I just had first of all, I'd like to say I've, over the past several years, attended a number of various township and school board meetings, and this is by far the best forum I've seen. I don't think it's the topic necessarily, so maybe it's just the way it works. So kudos to the League of Women Voters for doing this, and hopefully there's more just like this on topics that I could recommend. Just a couple of follow-up points to the points I raised earlier, the questions, and then a couple questions. One, the tax issue. I think you really should go at that. I just did some back-of-the-envelope math with some friends, and it looks like it hits double digits pretty quickly for people. So I think people should know that, just for clarity and transparency purposes. Back to the governance issue. You just Google Bayshore and read that for a second and know there's a whole lot of issues around governance on what money is segregated and how it is ensured that it is segregated. Now, everyone knows, and no one's arguing that there's some serious flooding issues in this township, and people want to know that to whatever extent they're going to pay into this utility, that money is going to be used for appropriate purposes and only for those purposes. And I am not comfortable at all. I'd like to say lack of clarity, but there's nothing even here with regard to governance. So it's not that there's something that's not clear. There's just nothing. And given the history here in this township, I just think it's inappropriate, that there needs to be a lot of clarity around that. In terms of clarity as well, these projects were put up here, but correct me if I'm wrong, these are not necessarily the projects. There's no ROIs on these projects. There could be other projects. So I think people should understand that, because that was mentioned earlier, but in this project list quickly went up there as if these were the projects. And whatever projects are to come need to be vetted. The township also has a history of investing taxpayer money in some questionable assets. And people want to know, again, that the money is going to be spent appropriately. So a couple of questions. Equity. During the meeting on Monday, the township meeting, equity was mentioned a number of times. And I think you mentioned the pros of this utility. To me, the singular, unique benefit of this is the fact that it does share the cost over all the people who really contribute to the problem, which residential taxes do not do. So then my question is, you put up a slide that showed the township paying in $1.1 million, I think $1.2 million on an ongoing basis. That's out of residential tax dollars. On Monday, there was a reference that the board members said that they would seed this with $1.2 million. If it's really an equity issue, why would the township be doing that? Why wouldn't we throw all of the stormwater costs into this so that they're shared across everyone? And in terms of equity, this is such a serious problem. Now, I don't know in the mission statement of a township where stormwater comes. Police probably first, fire second, but stormwater is pretty high up there, I think. So it's really disturbing to me that when I hear over 10 years, other than for emergencies, this board and previous boards have really allocated very few dollars to this, which means that current taxpayers are going to bear a disproportionate burden of the expenses to fix this. Is that a fair assessment? And is that equitable? And how is that going to be addressed?
Mr. Heldring, you're asking questions of policy that nobody at this table can set. Okay, this came up at the SAC meeting. You're asking questions that would really come from our elected officials, our governing body, the Board of Commissioners, and whether, with input from us. But one thing I would like to assure you, we'll make sure there's language in there regarding the enterprise fund and the separateness, but please be I want you to know perfectly up front that this money, Bill White, there is no better finance director, there is no better board. This money would be completely segregated and would only be used for that. And if we need to make sure there's some language to that effect, after tonight's conversations, I can see we need to do a little tweaking, and we can bring that to the board at the next meeting. So, but you're asking big policy questions, not something for a couple engineers and environmental scientists.
Hi, David Wood, 716 South Roberts Road in Bryn Mawr. I just want to make two comments. One would be about the equity of golf courses, schools, universities, and the way it's currently written, there is no equity there. And I try and reduce the runoff on our property as much as we possibly can. That isn't happening in other places, and they should have to pay for that. And they're currently under the language are not. The second thing I want to say is that you've talked about tweaking the language and changing the language tonight, but the commissioners over the last couple meetings have talked about pushing this ordinance through. Now, my parents live in North Wayne, and I want for them to not get washed away, so I want this passed as much as anybody does. But at the same time, under the current way it's written, it's not going to be a successful ordinance. And you can say that after it's done, you're going to go back and tweak it and fix it. That's not going to happen. We know how this goes. Whatever's done is going to be done, and then we're going to be stuck with it. And universities, golf courses, whatever else is out there, isn't going to have to pay their fair share, and they're going to be stuck there. So thank you.
Try to make some requested changes that will go to the board for their review, and they may wish to adopt or not adopt them. Or we have a very educated board. They're very highly educated on this subject, and they may have their own edits and comments well ahead of what we're thinking at this point.
Susan Stern, 813 Lawrence Lane. What capability do we have to bring the state into the conversation about stormwater management? Because I know I've brought to Mr. Norsini's attention a situation on Godfrey Road that's a state road, and he has limited capability to get the state to do the work that they need to do. You know, we have such clogged storm gutters on Godfrey Road that water literally just runs over the storm grates and continues down the hill to Darby Paley Road. And that's a state road. So, you know, what ability are we going to have to bring the state in to be responsible for their roads, their stormwater management? That's one part of the question. The other question is, and maybe this is going to be an issue of manpower, but it's not uncommon for me to drive around, and maybe many of us drive around during a rainstorm and see properties where dirt is clearly running off of the property. And whether it's a number of golf courses near my home or it's private construction that's going on, you literally can just see the water and the dirt coming off of the properties onto the roads, which clogs the streams, it clogs the stormwater infrastructure. And there's got to be a component there to monitor or to enforce or something there as well, because all of the pieces together, you know, what Mr. Wood said about trying to maintain the water on my own property, you know, we all each can do something, but what can we do to compel properties that are not within our control to do those things when they're clearly impacting the situation?
I'll work backwards and on the properties. And I know we have seen properties where, you know, you'll see water with sediment coming off them from construction. It's not every property that's under construction in the township by any means. There are some. Our inspector, when we know there's rains coming, he's very proactive, and he goes out to these sites. He's making sure silt fence is buttoned up and all that. But are there issues like that? Sure. We need to be more vigilant. And part of this program can be used towards that, okay? And maybe we need to be, you know, change some of our E&S requirements. As far as the state, we did talk about the state with a couple that lives off of King of Prussia Road. And it's a tough subject. I know the state has very limited funds, and very limited. So it's a harsh reality that they do. The fact is, state roads do impact all our residents, right? But they're not our, quote, our roads. PennDOT would like nothing more than to give us back those roads. Believe me, there's a take back program. They would whisk me off if I came with a list from the commissioners that we signed. But I think it gives us an ability to perhaps partner, and we may have to force that move and say, hey, you know what? You're not going to do anything. If we partner with you, will you do something for the benefit of our residents? And, you know, there's so many state roads that go through: Sproul, Godfrey, Conestoga, you know, 320, Lancaster Avenue, North Wayne, South Wayne. So many roads that are state roads that, you know, we've had issues on South Wayne Avenue for 2 years, since before I came here 2 years ago. And I've had the county maintenance manager out to look at them. And I don't know if there's going to be anything they can do at this time still. So I think that will be an impetus, maybe. And again, not my decision, a suggestion of mine to the board that they could take or not take.
I just had a brief question. Has our solicitor put anything in writing with regard to the legality of a fee system outside of formal utility, outside of a formal authority? Or is it, he simply, Gene made that reference. I'm not familiar with that. I'm going to go do a little research. I know there's utility authority, that's one thing, but we're not an authority, we're a township. And I think this is quite unique to have fee structures in a township.
Right, and again, it's a user fee. And when Gene refers to utilities, depending on which state you're in, there's different language and different definitions around those terminology. Utility is probably most commonly used across the country, but it's not in Pennsylvania, where typically you're going to see user fees, and in the future now probably stormwater authorities. In terms of opinion, I couldn't say, but the solicitor did draft the ordinance that's in front of the board.
I believe we have time for one more question. If someone hadn't had a chance, do we have any folks that haven't had a chance to ask one?
Hi, I'm Bob McCabe. I live on St. David's Avenue. It seems like we have been spending about 1.56 million of our general revenue on this item, and you're proposing about a little under 2 million. Why wouldn't the commissioners be really tempted to say, well, you're taking care of that with this special credit, tax, whatever you want to call it, and we don't have to dip into the general revenue anymore? In other words, we wind up being back exactly where we are if the commissioners stop contributing for the stormwater.
I certainly don't want to talk for your commissioners, but I think the idea of putting this in an ordinance and making it as transparent as possible is what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to say that this program of services to be funded is this $2 million that will include these certain things. It's a level of service of doing inspections and maintenance and replacement. That 1.5 million for now is in the general fund. I expect those conversations will happen at the public hearing with the commissioners, and they can say what they think. But right now, we're only going to fund $2 million, and so for that fee to go up, it will be an annual discussion, just like your budget. So if 2 or 3 years down the road, there's another project at budget time, and they'll say, if we need to spend another $1 million, we want to raise the fee. So this is not a one-time deal. I'm not going to tell you it's always going to be like this. We're trying to keep it flat for the first couple of years, but if there's some emergency or something. But I really do this a lot, and it really is important that you document everything that we're talking about, and that you hold your leadership responsible for coming through with what they say. And so, that hearing your conversation about what should be in the ordinance is very helpful. We want to make sure that we do button it up well, but not too well that we're restricting what we can do. So I hope that you just have a little faith that we can get it done well.
Yes, my name is Randy Roberts, 663 Conestoga Road. I just want to thank the League of Women Voters. I also want to thank Mr. Norsini because he addressed my problem, and unfortunately his hands are tied because I live on a state road. And I want to thank all the individuals here. I mean, we've really got a good grasp on a lot of issues, and I think moving forward, we're going to accomplish something because we do have some issues, and I'm full favor of paying something, and I just want to thank everybody.
Well, that was a lovely conclusion. I will add my thanks to our panelists for their wonderful presentations this evening. More so, though, for you folks that were willing to come out on a Thursday night before Labor Day. I do want to remind you that we'll be holding 2 more of these forum on September the 12th at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. here at the Township. I was asked by someone that left a little earlier, will there be different things discussed? Probably not a lot. It'll just depend on, excuse me, the participants' questions as to whether there's anything different, but they'll be televised also. So everybody have a lovely Labor Day weekend. Thank you.